The town of Clearwater, nestled in the heart of the Midwest, appeared idyllic at first glance, a serene enclave with tree-lined streets and manicured lawns. But beneath its polished exterior lay deep-rooted divisions, particularly between the predominantly white police force and the resilient but marginalized black community. The tension here wasn't loud or explosive. It simmered quietly, woven into everyday interactions through knowing looks, unspoken rules, and systemic inequities that governed life in the town. At the center of this dynamic stood the police station, a symbol of authority and tradition. Its brick facade loomed over the town square, the American flag fluttering proudly above it. Inside, the department operated like an impenetrable fortress, bound by loyalty and camaraderie. Misconduct was whispered about, but rarely confronted, complaints often stifled before they reached the chief's desk. Yet, as national scrutiny on policing intensified, Clearwater's leadership felt the pressure to act. In response, Mayor Thompson made a quiet yet pivotal decision, appointing Derek Lawson as the new police chief. Derek Lawson was no ordinary choice. A decorated veteran with years of experience navigating urban policing and spearheading community reform initiatives, he carried not only credentials, but also resilience forged from decades of confronting systemic racism. Growing up in the South during the waning days of segregation, Derek understood how deeply prejudice could burrow into institutions and people. But he had also witnessed change, slow though it may be, driven by persistence and courage. For Derek, this appointment wasn't just another job. It was a calling. He believed in accountability tempered with empathy, in leading by example while extending opportunities for growth and transformation. Knowing the challenges ahead, Derek arrived in Clearwater days earlier than planned, choosing to observe the town incognito. Dressed casually in jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers, he blended seamlessly into the evening crowd. As dusk settled, casting golden hues across the streets, Derek walked with purpose, absorbing the rhythms of the community. Storefronts bore closed signs, children's laughter faded into silence, and wary glances followed him as he moved through neighborhoods where his presence seemed unexpected. What Derek saw troubled him: the subtle dynamics of exclusion, the weight of history pressing down on both sides of the divide. He knew the police force would be his toughest challenge. Cultures steeped in tradition don't transform overnight, but Derek was determined to start somewhere. What he didn't anticipate, however, was how quickly fate would thrust him into the heart of the conflict. That same night, officers Brett Connolly and Mike Simmons were patrolling the area. Young, brash, and emboldened by a culture of impunity, they thrived on exerting control. Spotting Derek sitting alone on a park bench, they approached with suspicion. "Evening, buddy," Brett began, his tone mocking. "Mind telling us what you're doing out here?" "Just taking a walk," Derek replied calmly, meeting their gaze without hesitation. "A walk?" Brett sneered, exchanging a glance with Mike. "People don't usually stroll around here at night." "Got ID?" Derek raised an eyebrow, sensing the direction this encounter was heading. "I'm not sure I need to show you my ID unless I've done something wrong." Mike stepped closer, arms crossed. "Listen, pal, we're just doing our job. If you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem." Their condescension hung heavy in the air. Derek remained composed, repeating firmly, "I'm just out for a walk. That's not a crime." But Brett's irritation flared. "You've got quite the attitude, don't you? You're in our town, on our watch. Either cooperate, or we might start thinking you're up to no good." Things escalated rapidly. Despite Derek's calm demeanor, the officers grew more agitated. Brett pulled out handcuffs, gripping Derek's arm roughly. "Since you want to play difficult, let's make this easy." They cuffed him and led him to a nearby flagpole, chaining him there with spare cuffs from their cruiser. "There," Brett said with a smirk. "Now you've got a front row seat to the great outdoors." Mocking laughter echoed through the empty park as they snapped photos, sharing them in their department's group chat. "Let's see how long he lasts," Brett quipped, leaning back against the cruiser. Derek stood silently, his expression unreadable. Though chained to the pole, his resolve remained unbroken. Little did these officers know, Their actions that night would ignite a chain reaction, forever altering the course of Clearwater's history and Derek's mission. Unbeknownst to them, the man they had just publicly humiliated wasn't some insignificant stranger. Far from it. He was about to become their superior. The cold bite of steel pressed against Derek's back as he stood chained to a pole in the quiet park, the crisp evening air nipping at his exposed hands. Silent and composed, his sharp eyes tracked every move made by Officers Brett and Michael. Nearby, those two leaned casually against their cruiser, laughing like this was all part of an ordinary night. "Man," Brett said with a smirk, scrolling through his phone, "I should have brought marshmallows. This is turning into quite the entertaining evening." Mike chuckled, tossing a pebble across the path. "You think we'll get a good story out of this suspicious vagrant? Detained for his own safety." He shook his head mockingly. Classic. Derek's calm demeanor only seemed to provoke them further. Brett stepped closer, tilting his head. His smirk widened. "You're awfully quiet, aren't you? Most people would be yelling for help or trying to negotiate their way out by now." Meeting Brett's gaze without flinching, Derek remained silent. For a fleeting moment, Brett's confidence faltered before he leaned in even closer, lowering his voice. "Do you think you're better than us, or something? You're just another guy who wandered where he doesn't belong." Mike joined in, standing on Derek's other side. "You know Brett," he said, feigning thoughtfulness. "I think he's too dumb to realize how much trouble he's in. Maybe we should educate him." Their laughter rang out harshly in the otherwise empty park. They continued mocking him, taking turns snapping pictures with their phones. Framing each shot to emphasize the chains binding Derek to the pole, one joked about adding filters to make it look artistic. "This is gold," Brett declared, tapping his screen. "I'm sending these to the guys, they'll love it." In that moment, Derek's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his assistant reminding him about tomorrow's formal announcement, his appointment as police chief. But Derek didn't react. Instead, he kept his focus trained on the officers in front of him while they reveled in their ignorance. "So, what do you think this guy does for a living?" Mike asked Brett loudly enough for Derek to hear. "Janitor? Delivery guy? I mean, look at him. He's got that nobody vibe down pat." "No," Brett replied, affecting a mock serious tone. "I bet he's one of those guys who thinks he's smarter than cops. Probably writes letters to the mayor complaining about us." Mike doubled over laughing, clutching his stomach. "Oh man, can you imagine? Dear Mr. Mayor, the officers in this town are so mean to me." Derek exhaled slowly, his expression unchanged. Years of discipline had taught him the power of patience when faced with provocation. These two weren't new to him. They were simply another iteration of the same challenge he'd encountered throughout his career. As the minutes dragged on, Brett and Mike grew restless. Brett leaned against the cruiser, scrolling idly through his phone, while Mike wandered off to make a call. Seizing the brief lull, Derek glanced at his watch, not out of concern for his safety, but because he couldn't ignore what this incident revealed about the culture awaiting him. "Hey Mike," Brett called suddenly. "Check this out. Johnson just texted back. He says this is hilarious." Mike returned, still chuckling. "Of course he does. This is Clearwater PD's finest work right here." Their laughter echoed once more until the distant crunch of gravel under tires interrupted them. A second cruiser pulled up, its headlights sweeping over the scene. Out stepped Officer Sarah Brooks, a seasoned member of the force known for her professionalism, a stark contrast to the antics of some of her colleagues. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Sarah froze. She took in the sight of Derek chained to the pole, his steady gaze meeting hers. Recognition hit her like a tidal wave. She'd been among the few briefed about the new chief's arrival. "Brett, Mike," she said slowly, her voice tense. "What the hell is going on here?" The two exchanged smug looks, oblivious to her mounting horror. "Just having a little fun," Brett replied nonchalantly. "This guy was loitering, so we figured we'd teach him a lesson." Sarah's jaw tightened as she stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Unchain him. Now." "Relax, Sarah," Mike said, rolling his eyes. "It's just a harmless prank. He's not going anywhere." Her voice hardened. "Unchain him before I call the captain. Do it. Now." Confused by her intensity, Brett fumbled with the keys. The smugness slipped from his face as he unlocked the cuffs, freeing Derek from the pole. "What's your problem?" Brett demanded defensively. Ignoring him, Sarah turned to Derek. "Sir, are you all right?" Derek brushed off his sleeves, breaking the silence with his calm voice. "I'm fine, Officer Brooks. Thank you for stepping in." Brett and Mike froze, their faces pale as realization dawned. They exchanged panicked glances, then looked back at Sarah, the weight of their situation crashing down on them like a freight train barreling through the park. The air seemed to thicken as Sarah stood beside Derek, her eyes never leaving Brett and Mike. Their earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by confusion and dread. Time itself seemed to pause in that charged, disbelieving moment. Derek cleared his throat, his voice firm yet controlled. "I'm sure you two are wondering why you've been asked to unchain me." His words cut through the silence like a blade. Brett opened his mouth but hesitated, unsure of what to say. Mike was the first to recover, shifting uncomfortably. The air crackled with tension as confusion clouded his thoughts, struggling to piece together a coherent response. "What's going on here?" he muttered under his breath, his eyes darting nervously between Derek and Sarah. "Who is this man?" The question lingered unspoken but heavy in the room. Derek's lips curled into a faint, self-assured smile. "I'm Derek Mitchell," he announced, his voice steady and commanding. "The man who will soon take the oath as Clearwater's new police chief." Those words struck Brett and Mike like a thunderclap. They froze in place, their faces pale, hearts pounding with dread. Sarah's eyes widened momentarily before she masked her reaction, fully aware that the situation was far more tangled and consequential than either of them could have anticipated. With an air of quiet authority, Derek stepped forward. His posture radiated confidence, every movement deliberate. "You both know exactly what this means," he said, gesturing toward the patrol car behind them, a glaring testament to their reckless actions. Their betrayal of the system they swore to uphold now lay exposed, undeniable. "You've turned the very principles you pledged to protect into a mockery." Brett opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Mike swallowed hard, his trembling hand reaching for his radio. The weight of their colossal blunder began to crash down on them. They had humiliated the one person destined to lead them, and the realization left them paralyzed. Sarah's sharp voice sliced through the suffocating silence. "Both of you are suspended pending investigation." She glanced at Derek, who gave a slow, approving nod. "Officer Brooks, I'll handle it from here," he said firmly, turning back to Brett and Mike. His gaze bore into them, unwavering. "This isn't over." The silence that followed was oppressive, settling over the two officers like a storm cloud. It dawned on them that the repercussions of their foolishness would ripple far beyond anything they'd imagined. By the next morning, rumors swirled through Clearwater PD like wildfire, igniting tensions within its walls. Once impenetrable barriers of loyalty and complicity among officers now seemed fragile, crumbling under Derek Mitchell's watchful eye. As the newly appointed chief, Derek wasted no time dismantling the rot that had festered for years. What once symbolized corruption, the chains binding him to a pole during his ordeal, now stood as a powerful emblem of how far the department had fallen and how high it needed to rise. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, Brett and Mike sat slumped, their uniforms creased, their expressions hollow. Placed on administrative leave, they knew deep down there was no escape. The gravity of their misdeeds pressed down on them, rendering even speech impossible. Across the table, Derek sat poised, exuding calm authority. His uniform carried the weight of earned respect, each thread woven with decades of dedication and resilience. He hadn't shouted or threatened. His mere presence demanded reverence. "You too," Derek began, his tone measured yet piercing, "have disgraced everything this department stands for. You exploited your positions of power to belittle someone deserving of your utmost respect, all for some fleeting amusement. Did you truly think there wouldn't be consequences? Let me make one thing crystal clear. This isn't just about me. This is about every single citizen who looks to us for protection, justice, and fairness." Brett shifted uncomfortably in his seat, shame flushing his cheeks, while Mike stared fixedly at the table, unable or unwilling to meet Derek's gaze. "Your actions undermine everything I stand for in this department. Fairness, integrity, honor," Derek continued, his words cutting through the oppressive stillness. Silence enveloped the room again, broken only by the sound of truth sinking in. Derek was in control, and he wasn't backing down. Brett and Mike understood then that they weren't merely facing reprimand. They were staring at the end of their careers. "I'm suspending you indefinitely," Derek concluded, his voice resolute. "And I'll be recommending your termination to the board. You've betrayed the badge, and now you must answer for it." As the door clicked shut behind them, the two officers were left alone with the crushing weight of their choices. Derek's arrival signaled change, and nothing, not arrogance, not fear, would derail his mission to restore accountability. In the weeks that followed, Derek Mitchell transformed Clearwater PD. A once stagnant atmosphere, thick with complacency, now pulsed with urgency and responsibility. Officers accustomed to walking untouchable corridors found themselves held accountable for their actions. Many began to see that the old ways were unsustainable and unacceptable. Derek moved swiftly to dismantle the toxic culture that had allowed such abuses of power to thrive. Mandatory training sessions on racial sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and ethical conduct became non-negotiable requirements. Zero tolerance for misconduct became the cornerstone of his leadership. The suspension and looming dismissal of Brett and Mike served as a stark warning to the department. No one was above accountability. Under Derek's guidance, Clearwater PD embarked on a journey toward redemption, a reminder that true leadership demands courage, conviction, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. And Derek Mitchell was determined to see it through. The weight of the punishment handed down sent shockwaves through the department, but it was more than just disciplinary action. It was a declaration of intent. This wasn't merely about holding two officers accountable. It was about establishing an unshakable standard for integrity and accountability across the entire force. The community, long skeptical of the police, responded to Derek's leadership with cautious hope. For years, many residents of Clearwater had harbored deep mistrust, feeling as though the police department operated on its own terms rather than serving their best interests. But Derek understood that trust is not given, it must be earned. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work rebuilding bridges by attending town hall meetings, openly discussing his vision for reform and listening intently to the concerns of citizens. His tone was never defensive. Instead, he approached every interaction with humility and a spirit of reconciliation. The ripple effects of that pivotal night in the park extended far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. Officers began to realize they were no longer untouchable figures above reproach. They were public servants bound by law and morality. Meanwhile, the community started to feel empowered again, believing their voices mattered and carried weight. Under Derek's guidance, Clearwater PD embarked on a new trajectory where accountability, integrity, and respect weren't optional ideals. They became non-negotiable pillars of the organization. As months passed, the seeds Derek Mitchell planted began to sprout within the ranks of the Clearwater Police Department. What had once been a culture marred by corruption and complacency was gradually transforming into one rooted in fairness, transparency, and genuine care for the community. Resistance from some quarters gave way to cautious optimism, and while Derek knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, he also recognized it as a journey worth taking. Derek's push for accountability initially drew mixed reactions. Veteran officers bristled at the sudden changes, viewing them as overly restrictive and unnecessary. Yet, Derek stood firm, driven by conviction and purpose. He worked tirelessly to demonstrate that these reforms weren't designed to undermine authority. They were meant to restore the fractured bond between the police and the people they served. To foster this understanding, Derek initiated open dialogues, hosting regular meetings where officers could voice their concerns and offer feedback. He believed true leadership wasn't about issuing directives from above. It was about cultivating mutual respect and shared understanding. Over time, attitudes began to shift. More officers came to see the value in Derek's approach, recognizing that their role wasn't simply to enforce laws, but to serve as guardians who inspired trust and confidence. The transformation wasn't confined to the walls of the precinct. It spilled out into the streets. Residents who had once felt alienated by the presence of law enforcement began to engage with officers in meaningful ways. Derek championed initiatives like outreach programs and community policing efforts, creating opportunities for officers to connect with citizens outside traditional enforcement scenarios. These efforts help humanize both sides, fostering relationships built on empathy and cooperation. Under Derek's stewardship, Clearwater PD evolved into something greater than just a police department. It became a unified team dedicated to making the city safer, fairer, and more inclusive. Where there had once been division, now there was collaboration. Where distrust had festered, trust began to flourish. And though the path forward remained challenging, the progress made under Derek's watch